we get started, I've obviously mentioned that this is a water project that Sustainable Skerries are running. We do a lot of other work for people who aren't familiar locally around all kinds of environmental issues. For example, pollinator corridors, open orchards, and we do a lot of events and festivals to raise awareness. This project, we secured funding from the local authority waters programme, LawPro. I don't think Aina's made it along this evening, but thank you very much to Aina for your help with that. And I also need to thank the Skerries Community Association. So Sustainable Skerries is a committee of that organisation. And through them, we're able to get a bridging loan so that we can manage the project. LawPro also funded another project in Skerries run by Tidy Towns and the Stream Huggers. Darrow's in charge of that. That focuses on the mill stream, but ours focuses on the town. We're going to be sharing a little bit more about the main project that we've been working on with Féidhlim when we run our Eco Festival in September. So that's 27th through to the 29th of September. And on the 28th, we'll be hearing a lot more detail about what we've been doing in Skerries and what we've got planned for water in Skerries. For those of you who are too far away to join us for that Eco Festival, there'll be updates online. So it's definitely worth following us on social and signing up for our email newsletter to hear a lot more about what we're doing on that and on everything else we're working on. So today we've asked Féidhlim to focus primarily on the smaller measures that people could take in their community gardens or in their own gardens that will help slow down and clean up water. So stuff that you don't need to get permission from another body primarily. And Féidhlim, for your information, we've got, as well as individuals on the line, we've got various Tidy Towns group, we've got people from Skerries Community Association, and we've got some community gardens and gardening groups. So that's your primary audience.
Okay.
So I'll hand over to you now, Féidhlim.
Thanks a million, Helen. Good to be here. Thank you very much for the welcome, and thank you for organising it. It's great to see these kind of projects beginning to really take shape around the country, and it's lovely to see the work that you're doing step by step in Skerries. That's really, really cool to see. So as Helen mentioned, I'm going to look at the slightly smaller projects generally, the rain gardens and rain planters and rain harvesting mostly. First, I want to jump in very briefly. Let me see, what will I look at first? I just want to just frame the context. So why are we doing this? What's the rationale behind it? Why save some water? Do you know what are the reasons for doing that? So basically, just in context, let's go back to the title, and that's catching the raindrop. So when a drop of rain is hurtling towards North County Dublin, what's going through its mind as it plummets towards the earth is, do I want to fall into the millstream catchment, or do I want to veer a little bit north, a little bit south, a little bit west, and land in the sea, land in Balbriggan, land in Baldoyle? Where do I want to end up? What stream do I want to join? And so if you can see my mouse here, you can see that these are the streams that flow into the mill stream, which flows into the South Beach at Skerries. Okay, so the high ground all the way around the mill stream, that's the upper extremity of the catchment area. So everything that goes on within that catchment area informs the water quality. Now, if you look at the colour of this river, the colour is orange, and that means that on the EPA maps, it's classed as Q2. On a scale of 1 to 5, where 1 is bad and 5 is high water quality, Q2 is classed as poor, okay? And I'll just give you the heads up, that's not a good thing, okay? So just to provide the context. So basically the cleaner we get our rivers and streams, the more pleasant the water is for a start, but also the more biodiversity it supports. And so this is a really important factor, given the fact that we're in the middle of the 6th mass extinction event on the planet, due to human pressures. I think we're something like 1,000 times the baseline level of extinction rates at the moment. And one of those factors is these huge pressures on habitat all over the country, whether it's the removal of pollinators, of plants for pollinating insects, or whether it's the deterioration in water quality. So the cleaner we can get our water quality, the better it is for those very, very vulnerable aquatic species like mayflies, stoneflies, caddisflies, dragonflies, all of those things that really like very, very clean water. And so if we consider that the first place to start is actually to get our sewage treatment sorted out, but that's not something that's really easy to do on a community level. We can advocate to Irish Water, and that can sometimes help, but they've got their own slow process. It's moving along. I think they're spending about 8 billion euros over a 5-year program at the moment, which is great to see that movement, but it's difficult for villages and towns to up their sewage treatment in the Irish Water arena because they've got their own program. So what's the next thing we can do? We can look at stormwater. That's the water that lands on the roof surfaces, the roads, the driveways. Urban stormwater can be up to 15% as polluting as raw sewage. So it can be remarkably polluted from milk, dog fouling, pigeon droppings, diesel, petrol, oil, grease, silt, mud, whatever it is. That can all have a serious impact on water quality. And that generally gets discharged into the sea or into rivers with no treatment whatsoever. Now, the other thing, the third element, is what's called combined sewers or combined storm sewer overflow. Now, when there's heavy rainfall, stormwater from the streets gets into the foul sewer in the older parts of the urban area that have a combined sewer where there's both foul from the toilets and the washing machines and dishwashers mixed with the stormwater that lands on the streets. Now, as you can imagine, the sheer volume of that can be very, very large. Now, the County Council and now Irish Water and the rest of us by extension, we really don't want our sewage treatment systems being completely flushed through by rainwater that comes in. So it is a good idea to protect the sewage treatment system from stormwater ingress. The way that's done is to install a storm sewer diverter. That allows a small volume of sewage and rainwater into the sewage treatment system, but that gradually fills up during a stormwater event. And where I live here in Lahinch, I've heard the figure that after half an hour of heavy rainfall in Ennistimon, the contents of the toilet float down the Ina River. So that's our threshold here. And that's because what's happening is that there's a restriction to the sewage treatment system. So after half an hour of heavy rainfall, the flow diverter chamber is full and it literally just overflows directly into the river. Okay, that's obviously not a good thing. Okay, it does protect the sewage treatment system, but it's got its obvious limitations. The only village in the country that has a system for dealing with that I know of is in Kilchima in County Mayo, where the storm sewer diverter pipe gets dumped straight into a constructed wetland for full filtration there, which is absolutely amazing. It should be rolled out all over the country. Now, in Skerries, I don't know exactly what the drainage network is like in Skerries, so I don't know exactly what goes where in terms of I know Sabina and Helen have sent on a lot of information during the report that we've done, but the nuances of it and how long it takes for the storm sewer to kick in and all that are beyond my knowledge at the moment. But generally, in the older parts of any town and village, they're combined. So that's a really good reason to protect the foul sewer, the combined sewer, from stormwater ingress. So that's our context. So when I start looking at planters and rain gardens, the context is how do we slow down the flow of water from the sky to the sewers, whether they're storm sewers or foul sewers. Okay, so I want to look briefly, let me see. I will say that a lot of the catchment is agricultural. Okay, there's a lot of farming in the area, like most catchments, and dealing with the upper catchment is a project that I'd love to take on as well, but it's a process. You know, step one is to jump in and be where we are. You know, to do what we can in our own area, within the urban area. Now, if we look at the reason why this stream is showing up as red is because it signifies that the mill stream is classed as at risk of not reaching its Water Framework Directive requirement of good quality by 2027. So it needs Q4 by 2027, and it's not showing any particular sign of achieving that at the moment. However, things are changing so quickly at the moment that I wouldn't actually place bets on it. You know, we could swing this around and have a river that's got a green rating of Q4 by 2027, if we do all of the things that we can do. So let's look first of all at rainwater harvesting. So this is a new rainwater harvesting gutter placed on a polytunnel in Ballynahown in Westmeath. This is ecologist Catherine O'Connell just demonstrating what happens. So we've got a straight-sided tunnel. The water flows off a new gutter piece straight into their water butt. So it's a really, really straightforward, it's a very straightforward mechanism that allows you to collect water from a polytunnel. And it might look really straightforward, but if that water is going into a storm sewer anywhere, then just catching the water for the polytunnel is really useful in that context. This is another example. We've got a metal downpipe. There's a rainwater diverter fitted into the downpipe that draws water out to one side into here for preference. When this is full, the water goes straight down onto this old milk churn, and there's a watering can attached to the milk churn. So you can draw on either of these pipes. And again, if that gutter was to go straight into the street or into the storm sewer, anything that we can catch reduces the pressure on the storm sewers. This is a system that I had in Ennis when we lived there. This is 4,000 cubic meters of water being saved off just a tin roof at the back of the house, just off of a shed. And this was for our polytunnel. So it's not the most elegant, it's not the most beautiful, but it was very effective. The old election posters are to keep the sunshine off in order to protect my plastic tanks. So those are the big IBC tanks, the 1 cubic meter tanks. And we've got 4 of those. So that's 4,000 litres of storage capacity on that example. So basically, what we want to consider, there's a number of things that we need to consider when we're looking at a rain harvesting system. There's the catchment, which is usually our roof. There's the conveyance, which is our gutter, and there's the container. So they're the 3 C's of rain harvesting. So basically, the design features that help to maximize water quality, a good, clean, impervious roof. So stone, slate, tin, whatever it is. If you can paint over your lead flashing, that works. When we were renovating a house here in Lahinch, we actually took off the lead when we were changing the roof and we used copper instead. That's one way to just keep the lead out of it. The roof should be free of moss, smooth, free of moss just to allow water to flow off quite quickly into the rainwater harvesting system. I'll be showing a mossy roof later, which I really like, which is the beginning of a green roof, but that's a slightly different subject. And the main reason for cutting out the overhanging trees, not even so much the needles or the leaves, but just the risk of bird droppings within it. That's one of them. So if you position a tap more than 5 centimeters above the base, it means that when you draw your water out of your rain harvesting tank, you won't be drawing off whatever fines have settled out of the bottom. So that's the reason for that. A coarse filter, that should be, say, C8ARSE, or a first flush device. They provide initial screening. This is if you're wanting to use your water, I suppose if you're going to a water filtration system for recirculating it for washing machines, dishwashers, for toilet flushing, that type of thing. I've only ever really worked with water collected for the garden or for car washing, outdoor use. So I don't really need it to be all that clean, particularly. So I've never bothered with first flush devices. Those are typically a mechanism that you put up close to the top of the gutter. In an initial shower of rain, hence the word first flush, the first flush of rain will actually get diverted away from the tank. And after that, then the water will go into your storage tank. And so that's a kind of a nifty way to keep your tank that bit cleaner. It's very important to exclude animals, insects, birds. One of the risks is that a bird might come down and start to drink from the top of an IBC tank and even tumble in. And it's remarkably difficult for them to get out again. And so you end up not just killing the biodiversity that you're trying to support, but also having this dead bird rotting in your water supply. So if you go watering your lettuces with that, it's, to say suboptimal is really not being explicit enough. It's really not a good idea to have decaying animals in your water supply system. It could pose quite a hazard in terms of illness. Discourage birds from perching on the roof. These are notes from somebody else. Personally, I'm never too fussed if birds perch on the roof. I'm okay with that. If you get loads of crows or loads of pigeons, it might be a problem in your area. At that case, I'd say use your water for feeding fish instead and just run, an algae tank and fish and get your protein that way. That's just another approach on the whole thing. The annual inspection and cleaning. For the annual inspection, if you've got a draw-off pipe at the very base of your tank, that can suck out the sludge for, you know, the sediments that settle at the end of the season. The other thing you can do, which is easier, is actually just to siphon it out. So just get a hose, fill it up with water, shove one end into your water butt, and then shove it right down to the base of the tank and swirl it around the bottom of the tank nice and slowly, hoovering up the sediments that are there. So avoid consumption within a few days. So after a large rainfall event, their notes are to avoid consumption within a few days. That's to allow the whole tank to settle. And this, the context of this is for a domestic supply. So their specific focus is saving rainwater, specifically as a drinking water source. And that's generally not the context that I'm referring to tonight. There are companies in Ireland. There's a company called Gemgate down in Whitegate, Gemgate, Gemgate, probably gemgate.com. And they're one of the people who've been supplying rain harvesting infrastructure for the longest in Ireland. And there's a lot of the bigger companies, Kingspan and the like, getting in on that market because they already supply plastic tanks and pumps. So it's an easy market for them to get into. But the argument that I'd make for Gemgate is because they're specialists in it and enthusiasts around it, they'll have much more specialist knowledge than one of the bigger suppliers that are getting into it because the infrastructure overlaps. Avoid the inclusion of water from other sources in the rainwater tank. So don't pipe your kitchen sink or your shower back into your water butt, you know, and ideally don't take in your driveway into the same water butt. But ideally, I'd like to work with gravity. So keep your water butt as high as possible. The higher you go, the more structure you need to build under it. That's one thing to keep in mind. But the higher you go, the more gravity head you have to pressurize your system so that you can water your polytunnel. And it obviously needs to be below the level of the gutter line. So in order to get water into your tank. So it needs to be below the gutter and above your polytunnel, somewhere in that gap. Now, there's a supplier called Olin Her. So Her Limited, I don't know, is it reedbedsirl.com will get them, or Olin Her Rain Harvesting Infrastructure. What Olin sells is, he does reed beds and dosing systems for reed beds and that kind of thing. He also sells rain harvesting infrastructure, particularly gravity-fed rain harvesting infrastructure for bringing gravity flow of rain harvesting straight back into your toilet cistern. So it's a wonderful way to close that loop. Our flush toilet is upstairs in this house, so we're not able to get the feed back from the gutter into the toilet cistern. But it's a relatively easy way to harvest water, and it slows down the flow because you're catching that rainfall and using it to flush your toilet. So whether there's water charges or not, it's kind of water for free. You're not going through the whole energetic process of sucking out water from the ground, treating it, medicating it, sterilizing it, pumping it, you know, delivering it to your toilet cistern just to mix it up with biosolids and fertilizer in the form of urine and feces, you know. So it's a really good idea to close that loop as early as you can. So for your tank design, basically it needs to work and it needs to be watertight. It needs to be have a good, solid, secure lid to make sure you can keep out insects, dirt, sunshine that would otherwise lead to algal growth potentially. A screened inlet filter can be beneficial. A screened overflow pipe. Now, the overflow pipe is to bring the excess out away from your tank to somewhere else within your garden. And I'll be talking about the rain gardens, which can fit in after that. Where are we? A manhole, ideally a ladder, that's just to access it. And just safe access and egress, you know, for the whole thing. If it's a large system for a house, it just needs to be really safe to use apart from anything else. An extraction system that does not contaminate the water. So rather than throwing in a bucket from the top on a string, you know, or on a rope, a tap or a pump is a much cleaner way to interface with the water that's in your tank. A soakaway then to prevent spilled water. So if the tank fills and overflows, or in the Irish context, when the tank fills and overflows, you need to make sure that there's somewhere for the water to go that doesn't just pond all the way around it. So perhaps channeling it away into a soak area or a rain garden, and we'll look at those in a moment. A maximum height of 2 meters. If you've got more than 2 meters, the weight of water is 1 metric ton per cubic meter. So if you've got lots and lots and lots of them high, that's putting an awful lot of pressure on the very base of your tank. So their recommendations are to have it a maximum of 2 meters, and that's just to avoid those very, very high pressures. So that's a general overview. That's nearly our text load for the night, but that's our overview of rain harvesting. If anybody wants to take a screenshot of that, feel free. But what I'll do is I've circulated the slides already with Helen and Sabina, so we might be able to circulate those with participants afterwards. Okay, so moving on to urban SUDs generally. Now, SUDs are sustained urban drainage systems or sustainable drainage systems. And basically the idea is to avoid the negative effects of paving, basically. When you pave an area of ground, your rainwater runoff rate is much faster. The amount of rainfall that shows up as runoff is higher. And your peak flow is much. Do you remember that? Do you remember that graph? I'm not even going to wibble it with my hands, but do you know the injunction to flatten the curve? Well, that could have been written for stormwater harvesting or for rainwater management techniques. Rather than having this big spike just after a storm, we want to slow that down, flatten that curve and level it off. So all of these mechanisms here are designed to flatten that curve. So source control techniques are nice and easy to visualize. If you've got a green roof, if you've got plants growing on your roof, when the rain falls, the rain leaves your roof much more slowly. So it flattens the curve. If you catch rainwater in a water butt, to the degree that you've used some of your water in the polytunnel in the last week, then that will flatten the curve as well, because it'll store that water and then it'll only reintroduce that into the catchment as you water your polytunnel. I'm only really going to talk to the green ones here, not the other ones, because I want measures that are particularly eco-friendly, be they, planted or they've got extra benefits for wildlife or filtration or whatever. So in terms of filter trenches, rain gardens and bioretention areas, these are basically the same thing. It's usually a matter of scale. On a small street scale or in-street measures or garden measures, they're usually called rain gardens. If they're larger areas, they're the same thing. It's basically a planted basin that allows the water to soak into the ground. And bioretention areas are effectively the same thing, but it's just a difference in scale. Swales are open channels, unlined, where the water flows along from A to B. It settles, it stores, it soaks into the ground, and it gets filtered as it goes. They can be really useful within the landscape as well. Stormwater wetlands, as the name suggests, it's kind of a big marsh area. Your stormwater comes off your street or off your town or village. Kilchima has one of these, where all the stormwater from the village goes into a great big wetland. And a really, really effective way to filter water and also to prevent flooding and droughts. Infiltration basins, very similar to bioretention areas, usually not planted in the same way, quite often just grassed. So for example, playing fields, if you've got parks can be set relatively low in the landscape and can be designed to flood quite actively. And in that way, they serve as very, very large infiltration basins. And, it doesn't particularly bother anybody if your living room floods, it's a major inconvenience. If your local park floods, you can wait a week for the silt to disappear again. Stormwater ponds, like stormwater wetlands, just large retention areas, usually with a restricted outlet, so that the pond fills up during a storm event and then slowly comes down again back to normal after that. So here is my green roof. This is a photograph from Skerries, and it's a lovely green roof that I want to highlight to everybody here to show that I really like it. So as part of the Tidy Towns work, please don't just sweep it and clear it, because it's a process. At this stage, you've got your mosses growing. The next natural successional stage is for various lichens and stuff to come in, various ferns to come in, polypores. They'll come in and begin to grow, particularly if there's overhang, if there's shadows anywhere, just to give them a little bit of shade. And this is quite a natural way to just leave things be and let this be part of the green infrastructure within the village. This is a rain harvesting, or it's a community project in Geishel in County Offaly. We've got our gully here at the lower corner of our car park. Remember, we're always, think like a raindrop. Where will I flow to once I land? If I land on this car park, I'm going to flow right down to the bottom corner. From there, then, we've fitted a pipe through the side of the gully trap. It was going to be soakaway. We've intercepted that and brought it into this open swale. The open swale isn't much longer than you see here. These can be much longer, but this one in Geishel is quite short, and it's designed basically to trap silt and fines before the water gets into this rain garden. This is basically like a gravel reed bed in this context. The water flows in at one end, out the other, and then on into this community pond. So the rain garden was a way to filter the water coming off the car park in order to top up the pond. This is a sunken lawn rain garden. If you've got a gutter coming down the side of your house, you can bring a small swale out beyond your path and into either an open area that can flood slightly to a depth maybe of 200 millimeters, something like that. Or you can backfill that area with wood chips, sand, soil, compost mix, and then plant it up with species that will tolerate being flooded and will also tolerate extended dry periods during the summer. So it's a very, very basic thing. Now you can have an overflow pipe back to the storm drain if you want to. So if there was a storm drain there anyway, then key back into that again. But I just want to point out that it's a really, really simple technique, and that can store a lot of water between showers. Here's an example in Ballinahown. So just in terms of the construction methodology, I'm going to go through this here simply because it's penned out in different points. And we'll be looking at this for the headland at the north of Skerries. So this is the same basic methodology. So basically, these were 3 areas that were raised planters in a car park in Ballinahown. We simply dropped all of them. So the process was as follows. We removed the topsoil from the tree planted areas and just stored that temporarily. We set some of it to one side for reuse afterwards. We removed the subsoil to a depth of 1 foot. We dug deeper into the subsoil, raked it around, loosened the ground a bit. It was sitting on a bed of 804, which is the compacted hardcore that's standard under roads and that kind of stuff. So that'll be fairly standard where there's an infrastructure project like a car park, that you engineer everything and then you plonk your topsoil on top of that. Whereas what we're wanting to do is reconnect with groundwater underneath. So we raked that over a bit to loosen it and allow more drainage from the site. We replaced the upper subsoil layer. Now, when I say the upper subsoil layer, that's I suppose the slightly more nutrient rich of the subsoils, the looser stuff, rather than the very stony, heavy stuff from underneath. And then we replaced the topsoil layer on top of that again, but we replaced that in such a way that there was still a dish left after the work. So when we removed a curbstone, which is the next point, we removed curbstones here, 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 and over, oh no, sorry, in here. Now, these areas were actually flooding. So there was extensive flooding, and all the way along here was flooding quite badly to a depth of, an inch, 2 inches, something like that, which doesn't sound dramatic. But if you're trying to climb in and out of your car, it's just a bit of a nuisance on a Sunday morning just across from the church. So when we remove those curbstones, the water is free to flow off directly from the car park area down into our new rain gardens. Tidy up around the works, planting carried out. Okay, so that was all done. So this is it a little while after planting, not quite the day of planting. Now, any of you who are old Tidy Towns hacks here, I'm not pointing at your age, I'm pointing to your length of time involved in Tidy Towns. This may not look terribly dramatic, okay? So I will flag that at the outset. Needs a bit of sweeping, that kind of stuff. The cigarette butt could probably do with being put into the rubbish bin. But basically you can see the methodology. We've removed a curb, we've dropped our area down, and we've found that in heavy rainfall, it makes a huge difference to the parking area. Here it is again. This is the same one, looking more attractive about a month ago for the Autumn Floral Festival. And so again, it's just a really, really straightforward measure that can be implemented very easily anywhere. This is a slightly different focus. This is taking a roadside in North Cork. We simply built small little dams within the channel. And so by the afternoon, we had a series of pocket pools all the way down along the roadside. So it's a similar idea, rain garden type approach, and a very, very straightforward method. So it's quite a nice one to do as well if you have a team of volunteers. There is a guide called the Rain Garden Guide. And this is something that some of you might be interested in pursuing further. I can share this with Sabina and Helen. Now, basically, they're looking at an area. okay, the black text on a white background is taken from the rain garden guide, and the white text on the black background is my calculation for, I just wanted to think it through. So the spelling mistakes are all in my block, not in the guide block. So a rain garden of 150 millimeters deep. So you can see here your rain garden picture. So that's what, 6 inches deep. You've got your gutter coming down. Preferentially, it's going to a water butt. The overflow comes out the gutter and down along, in this case, it's an open brick swale. Personally, I'd just leave that as an open grass swale or plant yellow flag iris into it. Now, they recommend 20% of the area of the roof. So that's quite a big area. This rain garden here is not 20% of the total roof surface that we're looking at in that building. I wouldn't worry too much about that. If you've got 20%, use it. If you don't have 20%, you're much better off putting in a rain garden than not putting in a rain garden. Okay. So these are some notes from a project that I've been working on in the Midlands. It's just looking at different calculation sizes. I'll leave it there if anybody's particularly interested, but I'll motor through it. Basically, what are we looking at? We're looking at a 5% area for stormwater wetland, a 10% area, 15% area. We were exploring the different depths. So for the Syria SUDS manual, which is the Construction Industry Research Association in the UK, it's taking what's called an M560 storm. So that's a 60-minute duration storm that occurs once every 5 years. Okay, so what's termed a 5-year flood. So if you want to store that volume, the rainfall depth is 17 millimeters from that interval. So over the area that we were looking at the car park, if we take 5%, we'd need to store that to a foot deep. Now, that was deemed too deep for safety reasons. So we explored doubling the area and halving the width, or increasing it again and making it shallower again. And so there's ways to tweak the depths in the areas and play around with them. The other approach would have been to avoid the stormwater and go with a bioretention area, which is an M130 storm. So an M130 storm is a 30-minute duration storm that occurs on average once every year. So it's the heaviest rainfall event that lasts half an hour that you're likely to get in a given year. Okay, that might be too much detail, but the information is there if anybody wants to follow it up. These are some examples from around Skerries. These are not set in stone. If I'm drawing on anybody's lawn, don't worry about it. It's only for teaching purposes. So the green line is at ground surface. So it's a bit less misleading because it actually looks like there's a box sitting up on top of the grass. What I was trying to convey was that you've got your green line and the orange dips down into the ground. So it's roughly a foot deep. We've removed a curb here and a curb here. The water running down the street can flow into this area, and we plant that up with yellow flag iris, water mint, and a couple of other things that will work in that area. Here on the headland at Skerries, what I'm conveying here is that we've got our green line around the outer perimeter of our stormwater, our bioretention area, or our rain garden, and then this is our revised contour. So very like the system of Ballynahown, where we're just dropping the ground level down a little bit more. We can always put a standpipe here, so then in very, very heavy rain, when the water does rise, it goes back into that downpipe. Now, I will say something here, and that is, if that downpipe, if that gully goes into a gravel trench and it percolates to the ground, that's actually not too bad. If it's piped straight to the sea, then it's not optimum. You know, it's not hugely problematic in this particular location. You won't get cars driving on that footpath, you know, so you don't have the risk of diesel, hydrocarbons, petrol, all that kind of stuff. But it's by putting in a rain garden there, you do bring in extra habitat. That is something you could do. You could argue that you can also get habitat by reinstating a nice coastal meadow. So there's ways and means. You know, it's a matter of looking and seeing, where am I going to put in a measure that's easy and possible, but also where am I going to put in a measure that's actually effective, okay? That's going to do something tangible. Here is another example, and we can either, and again, the green line is meant to be the top of the ground, working down from there, either work just within the green boundary there, or extend it out over these two car park spaces. The advantage of coming out over the car park spaces is that we store more water during rainfall, and we can key back into this gully. So when we dig down our concrete, so our steps are the same as Ballynahown, We remove our grass. We also dig down our concrete, dig it down to the required depth, backfill it with wood chip and loose soil. We can raise a standpipe here so that the whole basin can actually fill with water during a storm event. And only if the storm is extreme does it overtop safely back into this gully again and not flood the wider area. Okay. This is another rain garden idea. This is the sloping land beside the railway line and the roundabout. Water that's flowing off this sloping ground could literally be just routed into a large retention basin. You could still mow it. I'm hugely biased against mowing lawns. It's not one of my favorite things to do. There are so many benefits to leaving the wildflowers grow. So managing it as a wetland meadow would be far nicer. But again, you get the general idea. We can do it at scale rather than just on the scale of a tiny car park area. Okay, so we're back into tiny car park areas. And again, just using the area that's already available. And we've got a gully right beside us. So we've got gravity feeding the water down to us. So this is a nice, easy ask. And these are all from Skerries, these ones. This is the sunken curbside rain garden. We can do this slap bang in the middle of the street. You know, we can just take out one car park space that's got gravity on its side. It's low in the street with a gully beside it. And this is the kind of thing we do. Dig it out, replace with wood chips and soil or a sand compost mix, put in our plants, take out some of our curbs, and then have our drainage pipe at the base to carry the excess on. This is an example of where that would work. We've got a gully right down in this corner that we could feed into. Here's another example. We could leave the street and we could recontour the street slightly. You can see that the contouring is pulling water along to here. If we were to do something like this, we'd need to put the occasional line pulling the water back towards the rain garden where the raised planters are. I really like the raised planters here on the waterfront because they give the pedestrians a lovely feeling of protection here. So putting in your raised planters right close to the curb would just lead to plants falling out both onto your footpath and onto wherever pedestrians might walk on the outside of it. Again, we need to pipe it from the base back into our existing area here. Again, the principles are identical, same basic idea, digging down into the ground and coming back into our gully again for overflow. Here on the street, we could make these 2-3 times as wide quite comfortably and still have plenty of street space left. I've simply taken up the area that's already devoted to planters. So the green line here is actually in line with the left-hand side of these planters. So the sunken rain garden here would replace these raised planter features. So I'm not talking about raised planters in this context, I'm talking about sunken ones. Here again, just outside the Church of Ireland church, again, sinking down into the area and catching some of the stormwater that flows there. Okay. So on from rain gardens, I want to look at raised planters. Okay, so what we've got here is a downpipe coming into a raised planter, and after we've finished this, if we've still got time, I could play a brief video of the construction of this. It's actually 4 minutes long, so we'll see how we go for time. But basically what we've done is built a planter, lined it with plastic, put in gravel at the base, perforated pipe into the gravel. Our gutter enters just here, our downpipe. We've got also hidden, just this black thing just here is actually, no, it's not. It's lower. It's below the level of our lip. There's an overflow so that if this fills with water, it flows into the overflow, down into our T-piece and out here back into our storm gullies. So for preference, this diverter routes water into our water butt. When the water butt is full, the water continues down into our raised planter. Okay, so that's that setup. This is it in section view. There's actually meant to be a standpipe in the middle of this as well, a standpipe as a bypass pipe so that if the planter fills, it doesn't overflow onto the street. It overflows down into the base pipe. There's guides from Dublin City Council. And so in this example, I've just given some sizes. So what do we want to design for? In the Dublin context, we're designing for a 25mm rainfall event. Whereas in the UK, do I have the UK guides? No. In the, might finish already. Let me see. That was quick. Okay. So in the Dublin guides, they look at 25mm of rainfall. In the UK guidance, they were looking at 15mm of rainfall. So it's a kind of a different focus. So in this example, they were looking at a roof surface of 6 meters by 3 meters, which is 18 square meters of roof runoff space. And that translates then as a raised planter of 1.8 meters long, 60 centimeters wide, and 45 centimeters deep. And that provides the storage required for that 6 meter by 3 meter roof surface that they're running their example from. Okay, so that brings us to the end of that section, and I've got a natty little line there for some strange reason up at the top left-hand corner. I'm going to, let me see, it's 8:20. Are we okay? Are we okay to play that brief video? It's a 4-minute video. Is that too long? Yep. Okay, I'll just pull that up. And it just literally just shows the, I'm just going to pause. It shows the rain planter in construction. So it was done as a project for, how do I share this? It was done as a project for, it'll come up in front of me and I won't even need to tell you who it was for. Oh, it'll be at the end. It was the Ennis Garden Festival. Can you see that? And are you getting audio? Whoops. Are you getting audio from that? The audio is the bird song. Can you hear the bird song? No? Okay, Grant. If you can't hear the bird song, can I give you audio as we're going along? Are you able to hear me as it plays? Grant, because there's no voiceover in it. I keep on sharing the wrong thing. So basically, what I was doing was simply making a timber box. It was pure, this was for a demonstration project for the Ennis Garden Festival, funded by the Garden Festival through Lawpro about a year and a half back. So I'm literally just putting together a box out of wood that I have on site. I'm going to line that with plastic, infill it with various pipe fittings. So I'll annotate it a little bit as we go along. I'll just wait until I get to the point where things begin to change a little bit. So there's no lovely bird song playing at your end, is there? You'll have to imagine.
There's a bit like bird song, but tell me,
I'm enjoying it here.
How long did that take you?
4 minutes. This is a real-time video. It took me about a day and a half, I suppose. Something along those lines. So you can see there, I'm drilling the holes for the base pipe. So that'll fit in against the outlet pipe that's there. So you can see I've fitted the outlet pipe through the timber. I've fitted a plastic liner into it, and I'm just pinning that into place all the way around, just to lock it into position. So that goes under my roof. And there's actually a perforated pipe running along the length of the system there inside. So that's all in my liner and sealed up to my liner. So there's bitumen tape sealing it up. So it has to go out through the pipe. There's a bit of gravel at the base, bit of non-woven geotextile material. That slid down over my riser pipe. I've got rather a lot of wood chip in that. And the reason is that being a demonstration project, I wanted it light enough to fit into the boot of my car. It still broke the mechanism in the boot of my car. But modern cars aren't what they used to be. But it's much lighter than soil would have been. But the plants, wetland plants, are growing very happily in it. So wood chips are quite a good way to approach it. Yeah, I'm guessing it a day and a half. I can't remember quite what the time was on it, Mary. So I'm fitting the tap to the base of the water butt. I'm fitting it higher than I'd like to. I'd like to bring it lower down, but the blue water butts slope inwards. So I'm actually trying to get my tap on a straight face. On the top, it doesn't matter. It can go in on the curve. The only drawback of going in on the curve, you can see there's a bit of a kick on the pipe there. It pushes it up. So I just need to make sure that that's weighted down enough to actually bring water in. Because the tolerances here are quite tight. The water is diverted by this rainwater harvester in this pipe. If this is too high, all of my water will divert down into my planter and it won't go into the water butt itself. So topsoil on top to make it look official. Raking it around a little bit just to loosen it. So I've got various different wetland plants that I've dug up from my own garden here. So living in West Clare, we've got the drawback of having really bad soil. We've got the upside of having amazing soil for plants that are, native wildflowers. Just bad for gardening. So we fit the final bit to the downpipe, and there we go. So that's it. And that's smaller than your standard than your standard system, but it's a nice little example, and that's growing really nicely now. It's I need to give an updated photograph of it. The stones underneath the downpipe there, those are just to make sure that erosion doesn't happen of the soil itself. Okay, so I'll stop share on that. Okay, so that went on a little bit longer than I'd anticipated, so my apologies about that. So if anybody has any questions, now would be a great time to jump in and ask them.
So if you've got a question you want to ask Féidhlim directly, if you just unmute yourself and ask, I'd say if you'd rather I ask on your behalf, you can pop it into the chat and I'll do that. So Jane.
Hi there, that was really interesting, Féidhlim. Thank you. I have a question. Could you explain how you do the calculation for the dimensions of the rainwater garden from the, so you've got the area of your roof, but I didn't quite get how that translates to the dimensions for the rainwater garden.
Sure. I excerpted just a brief number of points from the Dublin City Council guidelines. So these are, where are they? Nope, not that one. I'm just trying to open a document here to be able to share it with you. Bear with me just 2 seconds, Jen, while I find this up and see if I can shut desktop altogether. Is that not opening? Okay, so this is the Dublin sorry about this. How-to guide for rainwater planters, and the calculations are basically how much rain to expect. They're allowing for 25 millimeters of rainfall. So basically, if you take your roof surface area, where are we with that? Step one, how much of the roof will drain into your planter? So which side of your roof will drain into your planter? So that was the 3 meters by 6 meters on their example house. So they're taking example 6 meters by 3 meters. They're taking that down, so that's their 18 square meters. They're multiplying that by 25 millimeters of rain. And they're coming up with 0.0254. What was that? That's 25 millimeters. Oh, sorry, that's just to get it to meters of rainfall. Multiplying that to get their 450 litres. Once they've got their 450 litres, I'm going through this, Jane, step by step just now as we're looking at it. Where are we? So 450 litres. They basically need to store 450 litres in their container. Okay, so their container size is probably if you've got a void ratio of 0.3. So I don't know if they even factored that in. That's the amount of storage within the soil itself that can hold rainfall. I'm tying myself up in knots, Jane, trying to explain this. I could go through it really slowly.
Don't worry, I've a vague idea of how it works now. That's all right.
Basically, calculate.
Sorry, I was just going to say we've got this guide on the Sustainable Skerries website.
Oh, okay, fine. That's
fine. A link to it, and I can try and remember my maths and help them.
Fantastic. Yeah, go through it step by step, Jane. If you find that there's a problem, give me a shout. And I'm on holidays as of 5 o'clock earlier today. So I won't answer you for about 2 weeks.
Oh, don't worry.
But just look through it and see. It's basically how much rain is falling on your roof. If you take 25 millimeters, that's great. And then how much volume does that produce? Then what size storage do I need to hold that volume?
Yeah.
And then build your planter of that size. That's it in a nutshell. What I really want to emphasize, though, is that any size at all will be of benefit.
Yeah.
That's the main thing. Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks for that.
I have a question there as well. So in a situation where you don't have access to a storm drain, can a rainwater garden act as a soakaway?
Yes.
Would you have to get really deep? How deep would you have to get? With mid-terrace, there's only 2 downpipes, so basically draining a third of a terrace here.
Right, okay, fair enough. Let me see. It depends very much on your soil infiltration rate. So the UK...
Builder's rubble.
It's builder's rubble. Maybe it'll just vanish. It's really dense.
dense.
So you're
It
not getting
floods
much vapor.
basically. The surface floods in rain.
Fair enough. What happens when the surface floods in rain? Where does that water flow to?
Basically there is kind of in the middle of the garden between the beds, there seems to be kind of a lower section.
Okay.
That's where it's mostly floods.
Okay. Could
It's
you
not.
deepen that area out and allow it to flow into that area and make it maybe a foot deeper and let it be a foot deep for most of the winter and let it be just a bog garden in the summer, dry at the base?
Yeah, it's a long piping because it's
Right.
about 10 meters away from the house.
Could you run it through an open swale? So basically a narrow open channel that would be it could be 3 inches deep and a foot wide.
It's possible. It's very difficult because the grass is technically higher than the house.
Right, okay.
And then it goes down again.
Yeah,
So
I have you. And if
it's a very, very odd setup. I'm just trying to think of possibilities that don't involve me digging a square meter or a cubic meter of soil out of the.
Yeah, I know what you mean. I know what you mean. Are you able to divert the gutter? One possibility might be to put in a rainwater diverter higher up, and that gives you a much smaller bore pipe. So you could bring a rainwater diverter down and just pipe that out across the garden. So that'd be a flexible 1-inch pipe.
Yeah, I mean, my idea was always to install water buds.
Okay.
So get a down pipe attached that leads into water bud, but I just need to know. I'm just thinking about possibilities what to do with the excess, because of course it shouldn't be going into the foundation or anywhere near the foundation.
Is that where it's going at the moment?
Well, at the moment, technically, we don't have a down pipe at all. We have 2 down pipes at the end of the terrace.
So where
we're right in the middle.
Water go? And what happens to that water? Does it land on your garden or does it flow away on either side?
Depends on how clean the drains are.
Okay.
At the moment, we have them cleaned, so most of the water does just go to the outside where there are storm drains, but that was built in the 2000s, and they just never installed a drain along the back.
Okay.
Which I think some builder said is actually illegal, but
probably. Probably.
They still didn't do it.
Yeah, I know what you mean. If you can, I know your neighbour's concerned as well. So can you work with the other houses in the area to get a solution?
I think one of them has. They just drilled a hole, I think, and get it. I think in the end it just comes down to digging a soakaway.
Okay.
Somewhere.
Right. Yeah.
But
and if it's possible to keep that at surface level, then that's generally much better for biodiversity, for wildlife, for pollinators, and for water quality. Because once the water is in contact with the plant roots, it's getting more uptake of nutrients than if you bury it deep down.
Yeah, we were thinking of doing like a micro pond, so maybe there's something can be done there.
Perfect. That'd be ideal. And if you can cut the gutters up a little bit higher and pull them out at a higher level, that might help you with the difficult falls on site.
Yeah.
Potentially.
We have to get someone in to get a downpipe installed. That's kind of
it's exactly the kind of thing that LawPro might help you to fund.
Okay.
Somebody in the area like Colin O'Reilly, who's a hydrologist, he might be able to look at it and give you really, really good advice. Envirologic is his company. And so if you get funding through LawPro, he might be able to give you really good advice on that.
Okay, that's something to keep in mind. Thank you very much. I'm
busy trying to stay close to the waves and close to the surfing and pass off the work to somebody who actually lives in Dublin.
Cool. That's fair. That's fair.
Thanks, Jessica. That's great. Anybody else?
Thank you very much.
Questions? Thank you.
We've got an interesting question here on the chat. Marion has said, if you allow moss and things like that to grow on a roof, is there any risk of that eventually damaging your tiles or your slates? Are there certain roofs that we should watch out for that, or is that not something you'd be too worried about?
Okay, I'm not aware of damage, certainly not by moss. The bryophytes are just amazing. If anybody hasn't read Robin Wall Kimmerer's book, Gathering Moss, go and order it from the library or buy it or download it on BorrowBox. immediately. It's absolutely wonderful. And it gives you a whole new glimpse into the world of these tiny, tiny little ancient plants. And so the roots aren't invasive of the moss in particular. Now, if there was grass or ivy, that might be a different matter, but the roots would spread much more. To what degree they damage a roof, I simply don't know. It would depend an awful lot on the roof. So modern school roofs or, shopping centers or whatever, where you've got, a rubber membrane all the way across, it's possible that you could actively begin to build a green roof and build what Dusty Gedge calls a brown roof. Dusty Gedge is one of the authors of the London guidelines, the UK guidelines, and he advocates for brown roofs, which he says, and the definition of a brown roof rather than a green roof, green is very often seen as a sedum monoculture. And for him, a brown roof has the odd log and a pile of gravel and bits and pieces and different stones to create different habitats everywhere you look. And that works really well on the more modern flat roofs. But I'd say play it by ear, but don't be afraid of the mosses anyway. I hope that helps.
That's brilliant. Has anyone else got a question for Féidhlim? We had another one on the chat asking if you could mention the names of the wetland plants that would be useful to plant in some of the sort of measures you've mentioned again.
Sure. I'm just going to take a quick look and see if there's guidance on the Dublin list, because there's a different suite of plants that are used depending on your focus. My focus throughout the years has always been towards wetlands, basically. So that's what I tend to know. And so for me, what I've tended to use is things like yellow flag iris, water mint. I've got orchids in mine, which I dug up from my lawn. I'm not suggesting you out and dig them up in the wild. What else? Let me see. There's figwort, which I love. Figwort is an amazing plant that wasps absolutely adore. And so if you want to drag your wasps away from your patio and over towards your rain garden instead, plant them over there. I don't know if they'll come in for the figwort and then visit your patio. I'm not sure if it works that way around, but they're just amazing on so many different levels. So any species like that are great to have around. Now, having said that, species that tolerate variable conditions. So basically on the UK guidance, they've got Gilder Rose, Dogwood. They've got a plant called Culver's Root that I don't even know of, Asters, Black-eyed Susan, Stinking Hellebore, Mombretia, Bugle, Columbine, Inula, which I don't know either. You can tell that as soon as it gets anyway cultivated, I don't know it at all. Hemp, agrimony, bellflower, sneezeweed, lesser periwinkle, which is a poisonous one, so don't mix that through your edible herbs. Elephant's ear, plantain lilies, yellow flag, Siberian flag. The list isn't much longer, so I keep going in case you recognize anything. Garlic and onions, so anything from the allium species. Soft rush, which is your standard field rush and that type of thing. Pendulous sedge is a lovely one. Zebra grass, switchgrass, royal fern, male fern, and broad buckler fern. Now, that's the UK list. I'm not going to stand behind all of those actually at all. What I would advocate for specifically is stuff that will tolerate wet and dry conditions and is native. And after that, feel free to go for colour and show all you like. I've been leaving, we have a little gravel patio area at the front. And just this morning, we have a small little cut-leaf geranium, tiny little geranium species. And, it's gone beyond flowering, but I'm really reluctant to pull them up. And this morning I saw an adult and a juvenile bullfinch coming down and just really going hammer and tongs at the seeds that were developing on it. So it's just lovely to see that when you just leave stuff there, particularly the smaller flowers that we don't tend to notice, there's all sorts of species that just look, they rely on those tiny flowers. If you're a midge or a hoverfly, you don't want more roses necessarily. You want those tiny little flowers that we tend to really ignore. And so providing space for those is amazing. So jamming those into your raised planter is one thing to do. Just walk around the area and see what's growing in your garden. What likes it? Try some dandelions, see how they do, different things, play with them in that way. So I hope that answers your question satisfactorily.
That's great. I'm thinking probably what might be quite useful for us to do Sustainable Skerries on our site in the section about water is to maybe gather a list of those plants and run it past you, Féidhlim, and share with this group and more widely, to have that sort of one source of information to have a look at.
Okay.
That'd be brilliant.
Great. Very happy to do that.
I think there's maybe one more question on the chat. Is there anyone else that would like to ask anything while we've got the expert in the room?
You do know the definition of an expert, don't you? It's made more mistakes than anybody else in a narrow field.
Well, that's it. It's brilliant to see this. We say we've been working with Féidhlim for a little while, and I've been along to a couple of other talks he's done, and we said, can we get the kind of the how to? Can you show us how it's done? So I've heard quite a lot about the theory, but it's amazing to see the video of you actually doing it, because it's quite hard to imagine without that kind of visual demonstration what it would look like. So that's brilliant. I think, unless I've missed anything on the chat, the only other one
One more question. Do you see the last one there from Mary?
Oh no, I haven't scrolled down. There we go, Mary. What about bamboo?
I would say, yeah, go for it. If you keep bamboo contained, it'll stay contained. If you keep it if you put it in your garden, it's likely to take over the entire garden. So take your chances on that. I don't have a really strong opinion one way or the other. I have seen it spread hugely, and then after 10, 20 years just die completely. I have a bamboo that my mum gave me in a pot, and I'm really betwixt and between whether to liberate it from the pot, where it'll probably die eventually, or not. And I'm really not sure whether to let it loose or not. The jury's out, because I've got 11 acres that it could just take over. I'd be worried about it. But in a pot, perfect. Do you have any particular thoughts on it, Mary, yourself? Do you have experience with it?
Féidhlim, I have a very old plant that's like over 50 years old,
Oh,
the
great.
original plant, and I took pieces off it and I've put it on sloping ground that has very poor soil. It's
Okay.
very stony.
Yeah.
I mean, you dig down and you're in like really hardcore stuff.
Right.
So like you can't even get a couple of inches down and you're in stone. And it has taken about 7 years to root. So it's very slow growing, but the
Yeah.
advantage is the runoff on the slope is
Yeah.
being taken up by the bamboo.
And you're noticing a tangible improvement in that?
Yeah, because there was a
Brilliant.
lot of runoff, and I've actually at the lower end of, there's a little wall, if you can think of a slope with a small wall on the end.
Yeah.
It used to just like gush down.
Yeah.
I had a few steps there, and the steps are continuously wet
Right.
all year round. And this year I took something, I have a small pond that I created, and
Mhm.
I took some what do you call them, those with the brown dots? I can't think now.
Common reed?
Yeah,
Tall common
just
reed?
I took some out of the pond and I decided to just put them on the ground, literally.
Okay.
And
Yeah.
they have taken root. And
Right.
now what's happening is they're taking up the water that's dropping off the bank.
Fantastic.
So I'm not creating pipes, I'm not digging, but I'm just putting
Interesting.
plants there that will benefit from the
Yeah.
water that's coming off the surface.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Yeah, no, very good.
I have a bit of a question myself there, Féidhlim, and that is, when you have those planters, are they meant to be planted with plants that can stay dry for a long time, and then when there is a lot of when there's a lot of water, then they'll just
Yeah.
gobble it up, and then again, so the water goes first into the water butt, and then if there's too much into the planter, or what way does it work?
Yes. Once the water butt is full, then the rainwater diverter kicks in and it dumps the rest of it into your planter. And yes, you basically need plants that will survive being flooded, but will also survive extended periods of drought in the summer. And of course, when you've got the water butt and the planter side by side, you can use the water butt to water your planter in the summer, and that frees up more space in the water butt then for the next shower.
Right.
Does that make sense? Yeah. Cool.
Would be great if, like, if I look at the people here, we have our Eco Festival coming up, as Helen mentioned, in 27th, 28th, 29th of September. And maybe people can say, actually, I started something that night, and this is
Cool.
what we do now. Wouldn't that be super?
That would be cool. So email in your photograph, everyone, to Sabina and Helen, so that we can show them on the night. That would be very cool.
That's brilliant. So if anyone's got another question, now's the time to shout. Otherwise, I'll just briefly explain a little bit about what we're hoping to do in Skerries. So we've got a small team for Sustainable Skerries who are looking into some of the ideas that Féidhlim's talked about just there. If anyone is local and would like to get involved, please give us a shout. That would be fabulous. Particularly anybody who's kind of practical and would like to have a go at maybe having a go at building something like the demonstration. We'd love to get something like that, get a water butt and a planter installed somewhere centrally in Skerries, so that we can then also put up a sign and say, look, this is what we've done and this is why we've done it, and this is where you can find out a bit more information about it, and just get people thinking about the connection between the heavy rainfall and what happens to the bathing waters if that happens, and what we can do to slow that water down. So what we'll do, we'll send an email to everyone to come along and with a few quick questions about, would you be interested in doing something like that? Would you be interested if we looked into how we could perhaps potentially get some funding to help people set that kind of thing up? No promises, but that's something that might be possible down the line. So we'd like to kind of understand who's interested at this stage to see what we might be able to do going forwards. And as I say, we can also share some of the documents that Féidhlim was referring to, so you can have a look at the calculations about the size of the roof and the size of the planter and do the maths a bit more slowly. But yeah.
I think there is another question.
Oh, brilliant.
Yeah, quick question just on DIY water butts. I mean, the ones I have at the moment are the ones you buy in the garden centre and that. But I've seen in some of your videos there the blue barrels and some brass fittings attached to them, which were your kind of own work, I think, rather than the shop bought ones. Have you any recommendations on that? I mean, what types of plastic is better or less harmful, should I say?
Okay, here we go. We'll try again. Basically, the different plastics have huge variations in toxicity levels. Most of them aren't toxic in use. They're toxic at manufacture, recycling, and incineration or disposal. And PVC is one of the ones that's really damaging. So I like to limit the amount of PVC that I buy. Now, I've worked with reed beds and wetlands, so sewage treatment systems most of my life, and PVC piping is standard. But I like to avoid it if I can. So the barrels, most of the barrels that you buy are actually polyethylene, either polyethylene or polypropylene. And those are much, much less toxic. I think it's I think it might be 10,000 times, the degrees. That basically polyethylene has a limited toxicity. PVC is some crazy figure like 10,000 times more toxic than that. I think polystyrene might be another massive jump in toxicity again. And I'm basing those figures off one talk that I heard from a chemist at an environmental event a number of years back. So you really need to check those properly. But basically my point being, if you can avoid PVC, great. It's a bit of a moot point actually, because most of the barrels you get are going to be polyethylene or polypropylene anyway, which are the safer plastic. Now, the reason why I've got blue barrels is because I'm also an enthusiast for minimizing resource use if I can. So I wrote a book called Towards Zero Waste. And with that in mind, I like to avoid buying something new if there's a waste product that I can use instead. So what I've got here, I've got 4 large blue water butts, which are all old food grade storage containers. So I got those from the Ballymilly Relish factory in Little Island, who are my cousins. So I'll ring them up and say, I want to come and raid your skip. So they've got a big recycling hopper, and I'll go down and I'll see what's in the skip, and I'll pull out a little plastic from that and use that. And that was going for recycling anyway. So, so that contained mustard, which was going to go into the relish mix. So so that's what I use here. So if you can team up with somebody who's got food grade plastics that you can use, or because you really want to avoid old chemical use, you don't particularly want something with chemicals in it. Chlorine is probably fine because it'll wash out as long as it's empty when you get it. and wash it with care and don't rinse it into watercourses, you know. But basically, let me see. I don't know, does that answer your question?
Yeah, no, that's good.
Yeah.
Thanks very much.
And then, when you're drilling your holes, drill on the flat, on the straight edge rather than on the bit of grade.
I got that, your point
Yeah.
there. Yeah. And it's
And then
quite easy to put in the fittings.
Yes, yeah. We're quite close to the coast here, so there's a lot of salt ingress. So going forward, I'm actually planning on using plastic fittings rather than brass fittings.
Okay.
Because my experience has been that the brass is actually wearing. There's iron fittings within the brass that are actually rusting on me.
Okay.
So and I'll see how they go. But they're still heavier duty than the ones you get in the standard water butts. Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Oh, and the rainwater diverter, those are possible to order from your local hardware shop.
Yeah.
And it looks like a square fitting. So it's a square with a round inside it. So it's designed for use on the standard round or standard square gutters. The one fitting there about 15 quid, something like that. And the big thing to remember there is that where you fit it on the pipe matters. It needs to be balanced with the rainwater harvesting tank so the tank doesn't overflow. Okay.
Great.
Lovely. That seemed, oh yes, there was one more thing. Sorry, what was it? There was a thought on, oh yes, grey water. It's actually really easy to reuse grey water in a hot summer if you keep a basin in your sink. This is the height of technology that I am willing to adopt, is to have a basin in my sink, and every so often, if the summer is too hot or dry, I can just lift it up, walk outside, and water whatever planter needs attention. You know, my fig tree or my herb garden or the roses or whatever it is. And obviously make sure that what's in the tank, what's in the basin is clean. So if you buy your cleaning chemicals in a supermarket, they're not going to be food grade. If you buy them in a health food shop, the chances of them being food grade are higher, okay? If you use food to clean your home, that's better again. So vinegar, lemon juice, and bread soda. If those are your cleaning chemicals, it's perfectly safe to use that water on your vegetables, okay? So just keep those little things in mind. We haven't really needed it this summer. It's been fairly dismal, but in a hot, dry summer, it's just, in the past, we've found it so useful to be able to just lift up the basin and bring it outside. And that's all grey water that's not ending up in the bay. Because ultimately, whenever you flush a toilet, turn on a tap, run a washing machine, that's basically a spring within the landscape. You're subtly introducing water into the catchment area, and you see it briefly, and then it vanishes down into the sinkhole, which is literally the sinkhole, down into your pipe network, and that re-emerges then after the sewage treatment system. The less grey water you dump onto the sewage treatment system, generally the more effective and more efficient the sewage treatment system will be. Thus, generally the cleaner Dublin Bay is going to be. So the more grey water you can keep out of your system, the better. And I'm not suggesting that you take it out and fire it onto the street or into the nearest gully, which might go straight into the river. But basically, that's that's just something to keep in mind. Just one final comment on that.
And speaking of near final comments, Helen, just forgive me 2 minutes. Show us your boat was something that we asked people. We are putting together something for those who are just beginning to get used to the whole idea of harvesting water and how to actually put up a water boat. And we have some very interesting experiences already, and maybe you can share some more. Quick shout out to Niamh Sharkey, who did the lovely design there.
Cool. Very cool. Thanks, Sabina.
So that, I think that's probably about it. So we'll be in touch with the follow-up that I described, and would love to stay in touch with you all as we kind of work through this process. And if you're doing something similar yourselves, would love to hear how that's going for you as well, because we're learning from failing as we're going along, but we're trying to do as much in Skerries as we can and kind of raise as much awareness in Skerries and further afield as we can.
Lovely.
So that's great. Thank you very much, Féidhlim. Enjoy a well-earned break.
Thanks a million. And thanks everyone for showing up. Great to see all your faces here.